The morning mist clung to the limestone walls of Isis Temple like memories that refused to fade. Judmon knelt beside the fermentation vats, his calloused hands testing the temperature of the brewing aromatic drinks that would soon grace the evening ceremonies. The air was thick with the scent of cardamom and rose petals, spices that had once brought him joy but now served as bitter reminders of what he had lost. 6 months had passed since Kertep left him for Julius, a servant of higher caste whose delicate hands had never known the roughness of clay or the heat of the kilns. 6 months since the workshop had fallen silent except for Judman's solitary footsteps and the bubbling of his fermentation vessels. The amphras they had created together still lined the walls, each one a testament to their shared craftsmanship and the love that had once flourished between them like the most carefully tended vine. Judmon pressed his palm against the cool surface of a large amphora decorated with intertwining lotus flowers. He and Kertep had worked on this piece for weeks, taking turns at the wheel, their hands sometimes overlapping as they shaped the clay. The memory of Kertep's laughter echoing through the workshop was so vivid that Judmon could almost hear it now, mixing with the gentle sounds of fermentation that surrounded him. The temple's beverage workshop was Judman's sanctuary, the one place where he could lose himself in the ancient art of creating the sacred drinks that connected mortals to the divine. Each recipe had been passed down through generations of temple craftsmen, and Judmon had added his own innovations, discovering new combinations of herbs and spices that could induce visions, promote healing, or simply bring comfort to troubled souls. But today, even the familiar rhythms of his work couldn't quiet the ache in his chest. He moved from vat to vat, checking the progress of each brew, adjusting temperatures, adding ingredients with the precision of a master craftsman. The drink he was preparing for tonight's ceremony was particularly complex, requiring 7 different herbs to be added at specific intervals over the course of 3 days. It was a recipe he had perfected with Kertep, who had possessed an uncanny ability to detect the exact moment when each ingredient should be introduced. The workshop door opened with a soft creak, and Judmon looked up expecting to see one of the junior priests coming to check on the evening's preparations. Instead, he found himself staring at a man he had never seen before. The stranger was tall and lean, with dark hair that caught the light filtering through the workshop's high windows. His skin had the olive tone common to those from the eastern provinces, and his clothes marked him as someone of importance within the temple hierarchy. But it was the man's eyes that caught Judman's attention. They were the color of deep jade, intense and penetrating, as if they could see straight through to his soul. There was something unsettling about the way the stranger looked at him, not with the casual interest of someone making a routine inspection, but with a focused attention that made Judman's skin prickle with awareness. "You must be Judmon," the stranger said, his voice carrying a slight accent that Judmon couldn't quite place. "I am Decanes, the new supervisor of quality and records. I've been assigned to oversee the beverage production for the temple." Judmon straightened, wiping his hands on the leather apron tied around his waist. He had heard rumors that the temple administration was bringing in new supervisors, men with advanced training in the art of evaluation and control. He hadn't expected someone so young, or someone whose presence would affect him so strongly. "Welcome to the workshop," Judmon said, his voice more formal than he intended. "I was just checking on the evening's batch. The fermentation is proceeding according to schedule." Decanes moved closer, and Judmon caught a whiff of his scent, clean and masculine with undertones of sandalwood and something uniquely his own. The supervisor bent over one of the fermentation vats, inhaling deeply, his eyes closing as he concentrated on the aroma rising from the bubbling liquid. "This is interesting," Decanes murmured, opening his eyes to look directly at Judmon. "The base recipe is traditional, but there's something else here. Something that wasn't in the original formula." Judmon felt a flush of pride mixed with defensiveness. "I've made some modifications over the years, small improvements that enhance the flavor and the spiritual properties of the drink." "I'm not criticizing," Decanes said, his tone gentle but serious. "I'm observing. You're not just brewing ingredients, Judmon. You're brewing memory." The words hit Judmon like a physical blow, and he had to grip the edge of the workbench to steady himself. How could this stranger, this man who had known him for mere minutes, see so clearly what he had been trying to hide even from himself. "I don't know what you mean," Judman said, but his voice lacked conviction. Decanes moved to another vat, this one containing a darker liquid that would be used for the temple's evening meditation rituals. Again, he inhaled deeply, his expression thoughtful and contemplative. "Pain has a distinctive quality when it's been fermented," Decanes said quietly. "It takes on depth, complexity. It becomes something that can nourish as well as hurt." He looked up at Judman again, those jade eyes seeming to peer into the deepest corners of his heart. "You're not just a craftsman, Judman. You're an alchemist of emotion." Judman felt exposed, vulnerable in a way he hadn't experienced since Kertep's departure. This man, this supervisor who was supposed to be checking on production schedules and quality standards, was instead seeing things that Judman had buried so deep he had almost convinced himself they didn't exist. "The evening ceremony begins in 2 hours," Judman said, changing the subject abruptly. "I need to prepare the final batch for serving." "Of course," Decanes said, but he made no move to leave. Instead, he picked up one of the ceramic cups used for tasting and held it out to Judman. "Would you show me your process? I'd like to understand how you work." For the next hour, Judman found himself demonstrating his techniques to this enigmatic supervisor, explaining the intricacies of fermentation timing, the importance of temperature control, the subtle art of balancing flavors and spiritual properties. Decanes listened intently, asking insightful questions that revealed a deep understanding of the craft that went far beyond mere administrative oversight. As they worked together, Judman became aware of the easy rhythm that developed between them. Decanes seemed to anticipate his needs, handing him ingredients before he asked, adjusting the heat of the braziers without being told. It was a natural partnership that reminded Judman painfully of the collaboration he had once shared with Kertep, but with a quality that was uniquely its own. "You have experience with fermentation," Judman observed as Decanes expertly tested the consistency of a brewing mixture. "My family has been involved in wine production for generations," Decanes replied. "I learned the basics as a child, but I've never worked with the sacred beverages before. The spiritual component adds layers of complexity that I'm still learning to understand." As the afternoon wore on, Judman found himself relaxing in Decanes' presence. The supervisor's questions were intelligent and respectful, never challenging Judman's expertise but seeking to understand the deeper principles behind his methods. There was something deeply attractive about a man who could appreciate the subtle artistry involved in creating drinks that would lift the spirits of temple worshippers and connect them to the divine. When the evening ceremony approached, Decanes helped Judman load the prepared beverages onto serving trays, their hands occasionally brushing as they worked. Each contact sent a small electric shock through Judman's system, a reminder that his body was still capable of responding to attraction despite the emotional walls he had built around his heart. The temple's main hall was filled with worshippers when they arrived with the ceremonial drinks. Judman had attended hundreds of these evening services, but tonight felt different with Decanes standing beside him, observing the way the temple-goers received the beverages with reverence and gratitude. The drinks Judman had prepared with such care would help these people find peace, clarity, and connection to something greater than themselves. "This is why you do it," Decanes said quietly, watching as an elderly man sipped from his cup with tears of joy streaming down his face. "Not just for the craft, but for this." Judman nodded, feeling understood in a way that surprised him. Kertep had appreciated his skill as a craftsman, but he had never grasped the deeper spiritual dimension of Judman's work. This stranger seemed to comprehend both the technical mastery and the emotional purpose that drove Judman's dedication to his art. After the ceremony, they walked back to the workshop together, the evening air cool and fragrant with the scent of night-blooming jasmine. The temple grounds were peaceful, with only the soft sound of their footsteps on the stone pathways and the distant chanting of priests conducting late-night prayers. "Thank you for today," Decanes said as they reached the workshop door. "I learned more about the true nature of this work in one afternoon than I had in weeks of studying records and reports." "Thank you for understanding," Judman replied, surprised by his own honesty. "It's been a long time since someone saw what I was really trying to do." Decanes paused, his hand on the door handle, and turned to look at Judmon with those penetrating jade eyes. We all carry pain, Judmon. The difference is in what we choose to do with it. You've chosen to transform yours into something beautiful, something that brings healing to others. That's not just craftsmanship. That's art. After Decanes left, Judmon stood alone in his workshop, surrounded by the familiar scents and sounds of fermentation. But something had changed. The space no longer felt like a refuge from the world, but like a place where something new might be possible. The amphoras that had once reminded him only of loss now seemed to whisper possibilities for the future. The next morning brought news that would change everything. The temple's chief administrator, High Priest Marcus, announced that the upcoming Festival of Aromas would feature a new competitive element. Master craftsmen would be paired with supervisors to create collaborative presentations of their finest work. The pairings would be determined by sacred lot, ensuring that the gods themselves would choose the partnerships that would compete for the honor of providing the ceremonial drinks for the year's most important religious celebrations. Judmon felt his stomach clench with anxiety as he joined the other craftsmen in the temple's main courtyard for the drawing of lots. The idea of being forced to work closely with a supervisor was unsettling enough, but the possibility of being paired with someone who wouldn't understand his methods or appreciate his innovations made him genuinely nervous. The other craftsmen were equally apprehensive. Judmon could hear their worried murmurs as they speculated about which supervisors they might draw and how the forced partnerships would affect their work. Some of the older masters were openly hostile to the idea, viewing it as administrative interference in their sacred craft. High Priest Marcus stood at the front of the courtyard, flanked by the temple's senior administrators and the newly appointed supervisors. Judmon's eyes found Decanes among the group, noting how he stood apart from the others. His attention focused not on the ceremony but on the anxious faces of the craftsmen who would soon be his colleagues. The Festival of Aromas represents our temple's commitment to excellence in all aspects of sacred service, Marcus announced, his voice carrying across the courtyard. By combining the practical wisdom of our master craftsmen with the analytical expertise of our supervisors, we will create partnerships that elevate both disciplines to new heights of achievement. The lot drawing began with the senior masters, each man stepping forward to select a clay tablet from the sacred urn. As each pairing was announced, Judmon could see the reactions of both craftsmen and supervisors, some pleased with their assignments, others clearly concerned about the compatibility of their partnership. When Judmon's name was called, he walked to the urn on unsteady legs, his heart pounding so hard he was sure everyone could hear it. He reached into the vessel and withdrew a tablet, its surface warm from the morning sun. The symbol etched into the clay was one he didn't recognize, a stylized representation of a scroll intertwined with a vine. Judmon of the beverage workshop, Marcus announced, consulting his list of symbols. You are paired with Supervisor Decanes of Quality and Records. A collective sigh went through the assembled crowd, and Judmon heard someone whisper, "That partnership will be unstable." The comment stung, but when he looked across the courtyard at Decanes, he saw something in the supervisor's expression that gave him hope. It wasn't resignation or disappointment, but something that looked almost like anticipation. After the ceremony, Decanes approached him with a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I suppose we should discuss our strategy for the festival," he said, his tone professional but with an underlying warmth that made Judmon's pulse quicken. "I have some ideas," Judmon replied, then hesitated. "That is, if you're willing to work with my methods. I know some of the other supervisors prefer more traditional approaches." "I'm not interested in traditional approaches," Decanes said, his jade eyes intense. "I'm interested in excellence. And from what I observed yesterday, your methods produce results that go far beyond traditional expectations." They spent the morning in Judmon's workshop, discussing possibilities for their festival presentation. Decanes had brought records of previous competitions, detailed analyses of winning entries, and suggestions for innovations that might set their entry apart from the others. But as they talked, Judmon realized that the supervisor's real gift wasn't his analytical skills or his administrative expertise. Decanes could taste the emotion in every drink Judmon created. He could detect the subtle differences that mood and memory brought to the fermentation process. When Judman prepared a sample of his signature meditation blend, Decanes took a single sip and immediately identified not just the ingredients but the emotional state Judman had been in when he created it. "There's longing in this batch," Decanes said, setting down the tasting cup. "But not just simple desire. This is the longing that comes after loss, the kind that has been refined by time and acceptance." Judman stared at him in amazement. "How do you do that? How can you taste something so specific?" "The same way you create it," Decanes replied, "by paying attention to the connections between the physical and the emotional. You put your heart into every batch you make, Judman. I can taste it because you've made it part of the drink itself." As they worked together over the following days, Judman found himself opening up to Decanes in ways he hadn't expected. The supervisor was an excellent listener, drawing out stories about Judman's training, his innovations, his hopes for the future of temple beverage making. In return, Decanes shared his own background, his family's winemaking traditions, his scholarly interest in the intersection of craft and spirituality. The more time they spent together, the more Judman became aware of the growing attraction between them. It was subtle at first, manifesting in longer glances, accidental touches that lingered a moment too long, conversations that continued well past the point where business had been concluded. Decanes was intelligent, perceptive, and genuinely interested in Judman's work, but there was something deeper than professional respect in the way he looked at him. One evening, as they worked late in the workshop preparing a complex batch that required constant monitoring, disaster struck. Judman was adding the final ingredient to a particularly volatile mixture when the fermentation vessel suddenly erupted, sending hot liquid cascading across the workshop floor and drenching both men in the aromatic brew. Judman's first instinct was panic. The batch they had lost represented hours of careful work, and the ingredients were expensive and difficult to replace. But when he looked at Decanes, expecting to see anger or frustration, he found the supervisor calmly assessing the situation with his usual analytical precision. "Are you hurt?" Decanes asked, moving closer to examine Judman for signs of injury. "I'm fine," Judman replied, though his voice was shaking with adrenaline and disappointment. "But the batch is ruined. We'll have to start over, and I don't know if we have enough time before the festival." Instead of responding immediately, Decanes reached out and gently touched Judman's cheek, where a few drops of the spilled beverage still clung to his skin. The contact was soft, almost reverent, and it sent a shock of awareness through Judman's entire body. "The batch can be replaced," Decanes said quietly, his thumb brushing away the liquid drops with infinite care. "What matters is that you're safe." The moment stretched between them, charged with an electricity that had nothing to do with the accident and everything to do with the attraction that had been building for weeks. Judman found himself leaning into the touch, his eyes closing as he savored the feeling of being cared for, of being seen as more than just a craftsman or a problem to be solved. But the intimacy of the moment terrified him. The memory of Kertep's departure was still too fresh, the pain of abandonment still too raw. He pulled away abruptly, putting distance between himself and Decanes, his heart racing with fear and desire in equal measure. "I made a mistake before," Judman said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to make another one." Decanes didn't pursue him or try to minimize his concerns. Instead, he nodded with understanding, his expression gentle but not pitying. "I understand," he said simply, "but when you're ready to take the risk again, I'll be here." The statement was a promise and a reassurance, offered without pressure or expectation. It was so different from the way Kertep had pursued him, with passionate declarations and dramatic gestures that had swept Judman off his feet before he had time to think. Decanes was offering something steadier, more patient, more real. That night, Judman lay awake in his small chamber adjacent to the workshop, replaying the moment over and over in his mind. The touch of Decane's hand on his face had been so gentle, so caring, that it had awakened feelings he had thought were buried forever. But the fear was still there too, the terror of opening his heart only to have it broken again. The next morning, Decanes arrived at the workshop carrying 2 cups of tea and a basket of fresh bread from the temple bakery. He said nothing about the previous evening, instead focusing on the practical matter of recreating the batch they had lost. But throughout the day, Judman was aware of the supervisor's presence in a way that went beyond professional collaboration. Decanes seemed to understand exactly what Judman needed, offering assistance without being asked, providing encouragement when frustration threatened to overwhelm him, maintaining a steady presence that was both calming and inspiring. He didn't push for personal intimacy, but he also didn't retreat into purely professional distance. He was simply there, reliable and supportive, and genuinely caring about both Judman's work and his well-being. As the days passed, a new routine developed between them. Decanes would arrive early in the morning, often bringing breakfast or tea, and would stay late into the evening, helping with whatever tasks needed attention. He walked Judman home each night, their conversations ranging from technical discussions about fermentation to broader topics about art, spirituality, and life in the temple. The supervisor never pressured Judman for more than he was ready to give, but his presence was a constant reminder that someone cared about him as more than just a craftsman. When Judman worked with particular intensity, focusing on a difficult technique or a complex recipe, he would sometimes look up to find Decanes watching him with an expression of quiet admiration that made his heart skip a beat. "You create flavors from pain," Decanes said one evening as they cleaned up after a particularly challenging day of experimentation. "And somehow you transform that pain into something that brings joy to others. That's not just craft, Judman. That's alchemy of the soul." The words touched something deep in Judman's heart, a recognition that his work was more than just a job or even a calling. It was a way of taking the difficulties of his own life and transforming them into something that could help others find peace and connection. Kertep had appreciated his skill, but he had never understood the deeper purpose that drove Judman's dedication to his art. "I don't want to fix you," Decanes continued, his voice soft but firm. "I don't want to change you or make you forget your past. I want to remember you exactly as you are, to understand the experiences that have made you who you are." When their lips finally met, it was not with the desperate passion that had characterized Judman's relationship with Kertep, but with a gentleness that felt like a prayer to Isis for healing and renewal. The kiss was tender, exploratory, full of promise rather than demand. It spoke of patience and understanding, of a love that was willing to grow slowly and deepen gradually rather than burning bright and fast. Judman felt something shift inside him as they kissed, a loosening of the tight knot of fear and pain that had lived in his chest since Kertep's departure. This was not a replacement for what he had lost, but something entirely new, something that honored his past while opening the door to a different kind of future. The Festival of Aromas arrived with great fanfare, drawing visitors from temples throughout the region to witness the competition between master craftsmen and their assigned supervisors. The temple's main hall had been transformed into a showcase for the finest beverages in the province, with elaborate displays highlighting the technical excellence and spiritual significance of each entry. Judman and Decanes had created a presentation that told the story of transformation through fermentation, using a series of beverages that demonstrated how raw ingredients could be refined into something transcendent through patience, skill, and understanding. Their centerpiece was a complex meditation blend that combined traditional recipes with Judman's innovative techniques, creating a drink that was both familiar and revolutionary. As the judges moved through the hall, tasting and evaluating each entry, Judman felt a familiar nervousness mixed with pride in what he and Decanes had accomplished. Their partnership had produced work that was better than either of them could have achieved alone, combining Judman's intuitive understanding of fermentation with Decanes' analytical precision and emotional insight. The moment of truth came when Judman was called forward to present their entry to the assembled crowd. He had prepared a speech about the technical aspects of their work, but as he stood before the gathering of priests, craftsmen, and temple visitors, he found himself speaking from the heart instead. "Pain, like fermentation, cannot be hidden," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the hall. "But it can be transformed. If we wait, if we add light and patience and understanding, pain becomes something living, something real, something valuable. The beverages we create in this temple are not just drinks. They are prayers made manifest, offerings of our own transformed experience to help others find peace and connection." The audience listened with rapt attention, understanding that they were hearing not just a technical presentation but a confession of faith. Judman spoke about the role of the craftsman as a bridge between the human and the divine, about the responsibility to transform personal suffering into universal healing. As he concluded his presentation, Judman became aware of a disturbance near the back of the hall. Kertep had arrived, dressed in the fine clothes that marked his new status as consort to a higher caste servant. He was making his way through the crowd with the easy confidence of someone who belonged in elevated social circles, his presence a reminder of the world Judman had lost when their relationship ended. Judman felt his composure falter as Kertep approached the presentation area, his former lover's expression a mixture of curiosity and something that looked almost like mockery. The sight of him brought back a flood of memories, both good and painful, threatening to undermine the confidence Judman had built over the past weeks. "Interesting presentation," Kertep said, his voice carrying clearly through the sudden silence that had fallen over the nearby crowd. "Though I notice you're working with a new partner these days. I suppose anyone will do as a replacement when the original is no longer available." The words were calculated to wound, to reduce Judman's partnership with Decanes to a simple matter of convenience and need. They carried the implicit suggestion that Judman was incapable of genuine connection, that his relationships were interchangeable and ultimately meaningless. Before Judman could respond, Decanes appeared at his side, moving with quiet dignity to stand close enough that their shoulders touched. The supervisor's presence was calm and steady, a silent statement of support that spoke louder than any words could have. "He's not a replacement," Decanes said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of absolute certainty. "He's the reason I'm here. He's the reason I understand what it means to create something beautiful from pain, to transform suffering into art, to find the sacred in the everyday work of caring for others." The simple declaration had the power of truth behind it, and Judman felt something inside him settle into place. This was not about competing with his past or proving his worth to someone who had already decided he wasn't enough. This was about choosing to build something new with someone who valued him for who he was, not who he might become. Kertep's expression shifted from mockery to something like surprise, as if he hadn't expected to encounter such quiet confidence from either Judman or his new partner. The crowd around them seemed to sense the emotional undercurrents of the moment, creating a circle of respectful distance that allowed the confrontation to play out without interference. "I see," Kertep said finally, his tone carefully neutral. "Well, I wish you both success in your endeavors." As he moved away, Judman felt a sense of closure that he hadn't expected. The encounter had been painful but necessary, a final confirmation that the chapter of his life with Kertep was truly over. More importantly, it had shown him that his relationship with Decanes was strong enough to withstand external pressure and judgment. The festival's judges announced their results that evening, and Judman and Decanes were awarded the highest honors for their collaborative presentation. But more significant than the recognition was the way the temple community had responded to their partnership, accepting them as a unit, acknowledging the genuine connection that had developed between them. High Priest Marcus approached them after the ceremony, his expression one of pleased satisfaction. "The quality of work you've produced together has been exceptional," he said. "I'm promoting you, Judman, to head of the entire aromatic laboratory for the temple. You'll be responsible for training the next generation of craftsmen in the arts of sacred beverage creation." The promotion was more than Judman had ever dared to hope for, recognition not just of his technical skills but of his ability to teach and inspire others. It meant security, status, and the opportunity to share his knowledge with young craftsmen who were just beginning their own journeys in the craft. "Will you accept the position?" Marcus asked, though his tone suggested that refusal was not really an option. "I will," Judman replied, "but only if Decanes can continue as my partner in this work. The methods we've developed together are integral to the success of the program." Marcus smiled, as if he had expected this response. "I had hoped you would say that. Decanes has already been assigned as your permanent collaborator. The temple values partnerships that produce exceptional results." That evening, Judman and Decanes walked together through the temple gardens, their hands intertwined as they moved between the columns of ancient stone that caught and reflected the golden light of the setting sun. The other temple residents they passed smiled and nodded respectfully, their acceptance of the partnership complete and unquestioned. The gardens were peaceful in the evening light, filled with the scent of night-blooming flowers and the soft sound of water flowing through the ornamental fountains. They found a quiet alcove where they could sit together on a stone bench, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky above them. "I never thought I would be here again," Judmon said quietly, his head resting on Decane's shoulder. "I thought that part of my life was over, that I would spend the rest of my days alone with my work." "You were never meant to be alone," Decane's replied, his arm tightening around Judmon's shoulders. "Your work is about connection, about bringing people together with the divine. How could someone with such a gift for creating unity be destined for solitude?" They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the temple's evening activities wind down as priests and craftsmen retired to their chambers for the night. The fermentation workshop was visible from their vantage point, its windows glowing softly with the light of the braziers that kept the beverages at optimal temperature throughout the night. "Tomorrow we begin training the new apprentices," Judmon said, thinking about the responsibility that came with his new position. "I want to teach them not just the techniques, but the philosophy behind the work. They need to understand that they're not just making drinks, but creating connections. They'll learn from the best," Decane said, pressing a gentle kiss to the top of Judmon's head. "You have the rare ability to see the sacred in the mundane, to find the extraordinary in the everyday. That's a gift worth sharing." The night before the official ceremony that would mark the beginning of Judmon's new role as head of the aromatic laboratory, Decane surprised him with a special gift. In the center of the fermentation chamber, surrounded by the familiar scents and sounds of their shared work, he presented Judmon with a specially crafted amphora labeled, "Finally Home." The vessel was beautiful, decorated with intricate patterns that combined symbols of fermentation with representations of the temple's sacred mysteries. But more than its aesthetic appeal, the amphora represented something deeper, a recognition that their partnership had created a new kind of home, a place where both men could flourish and grow. "I had it made by the temple's master potter," Decanes explained, his voice soft with emotion. "I wanted you to have something that would remind you of this moment, of the choice we made to build something beautiful together." Judmon took the amphora in his hands, feeling the weight and balance of the perfectly crafted vessel. Like all the best ceremonial pieces, it was both functional and symbolic, capable of holding the precious beverages they would create while also serving as a reminder of the love that had made their collaboration possible. "It's perfect," Judmon said, his voice thick with emotion. "But you should know that I was already home. From the moment you understood what I was trying to do with my work, from the first time you tasted the emotion in my beverages, I was home." They made love that night surrounded by the steam and spices of the fermentation chamber, their bodies coming together with a passion that was both physical and spiritual. It was not the desperate coupling of new lovers, but the deep, satisfied intimacy of two people who had found in each other exactly what they had been searching for. Their connection was enhanced by the sacred atmosphere of the workshop, the place where they had first recognized their compatibility, where they had learned to work together, where they had built the foundation of their relationship through shared purpose and mutual respect. The sense of cardamom and rose petals, cinnamon and ginger, created an aromatic backdrop for their lovemaking that seemed to bless their union with the approval of the gods themselves. As they lay together afterward, their bodies still intertwined, their breathing gradually returning to normal, Judmon felt a completeness that he had never experienced before. This was not the frantic joy of new love or the comfortable familiarity of long partnership, but something that combined the best of both. Passion grounded in understanding, desire enhanced by respect, love that had been tested and proven strong. "I used to think that love was about being chosen first," Judmon whispered, his lips brushing against Decane's ear. "About being someone's first choice, their primary priority." "No," Decanes replied, his voice rumbling through his chest where Judmon's head rested. "Love is about being chosen again and again, every day, even when it would be easier to choose something else. It's about building something together that becomes more valuable than what either person could create alone." As the months passed, their partnership deepened both professionally and personally. Judmon threw himself into his new role as head of the aromatic laboratory, developing training programs that combined traditional techniques with innovative approaches. He taught the young apprentices not just how to create the sacred beverages, but why they were important, how they served the temple's mission of connecting people to the divine. Decanes proved to be an invaluable collaborator in this work, his analytical skills helping to codify and systematize the knowledge that Judmon had developed through years of intuitive experimentation. Together, they created comprehensive manuals that would ensure the temple's beverage-making traditions could be passed down to future generations with precision and consistency. But their greatest achievement was the way they transformed the workshop itself from a place of solitary craftsmanship into a center of collaborative learning. The new apprentices worked in pairs, learning not just individual techniques but the art of creative partnership. They were taught to taste not just flavors but emotions, to understand the spiritual as well as the physical properties of their work. The temple community embraced their leadership, recognizing that the quality of the sacred beverages had improved dramatically under their guidance. The evening ceremonies became more powerful, the meditation sessions more profound, the healing rituals more effective. People traveled from distant temples to experience the drinks created in Judmon's laboratory, and requests for training programs began arriving from religious communities throughout the region. One evening, as they worked together in the laboratory preparing beverages for a particularly important ceremony, Judmon paused to watch Decanes taste testing a complex blend they had been developing. The supervisor's face was a study in concentration, his senses focused entirely on detecting the subtle interplay of flavors and spiritual properties that would make the drink suitable for its sacred purpose. "What do you taste?" Judmon asked, genuinely curious about Decanes' assessment. "Hope," Decanes replied without hesitation. "This batch carries hope. Not the desperate kind that comes from fear, but the steady kind that comes from faith. The people who drink this tomorrow will leave the ceremony feeling more confident about their future." The accuracy of the assessment still amazed Judmon, even after months of working together. Decanes had developed an almost supernatural ability to detect the emotional qualities of the beverages they created, making him an invaluable partner in ensuring that each batch achieved its intended spiritual effect. "You've surpassed your teacher," Judmon said with a smile. "I'm not sure I could have identified the specific type of hope so precisely." "I had an excellent teacher," Decanes replied, moving closer to slip his arms around Judmon's waist. "Someone who showed me that the real art isn't in the techniques, but in the intention behind them." Their relationship had settled into a comfortable rhythm that balanced passion with companionship, professional collaboration with personal intimacy. They shared a small house near the temple complex, its rooms filled with the tools of their trade and the comfortable accumulation of a shared life. In the evenings, they would often sit together on their small terrace, watching the sunset paint the temple walls in shades of gold and rose while discussing their plans for the next day's work. The success of their program had attracted attention from the highest levels of the temple hierarchy, and they had been invited to present their methods at the annual convocation of regional religious leaders. It was an honor that carried both prestige and responsibility, an opportunity to influence the development of sacred beverage traditions throughout the province. "Are you nervous about the presentation?" Decanes asked one evening as they prepared for the upcoming convocation. "A little," Judmon admitted. "It's one thing to teach apprentices who are eager to learn. It's another to convince established masters that there might be better ways to do things they've been doing for decades." "You're not trying to convince them to abandon their traditions," Decanes pointed out. "You're showing them how to enhance those traditions, how to add depth and meaning to work they already value. That's not a threat to their expertise. It's a gift." The convocation was held at the Great Temple in the provincial capital, a magnificent complex that dwarfed even their own impressive facility. Religious leaders from dozens of communities gathered to share knowledge, discuss innovations, and strengthen the bonds between their various institutions. Judmon and Decanes presented their approach to a packed auditorium, demonstrating their techniques while explaining the philosophy that guided their work. They showed how emotional awareness could enhance the traditional methods of fermentation, how understanding the spiritual needs of the community could inform the selection of ingredients and timing of preparation. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with many of the attending masters expressing interest in implementing similar programs in their own temples. Several offered to send apprentices for advanced training, while others requested detailed manuals and consultation services. "You've started something significant here," said Elder Theron, the most senior priest in attendance. "This approach has the potential to revitalize our entire understanding of the relationship between craft and spirituality." The success of the convocation led to new opportunities and responsibilities. Judmon was appointed to a regional council responsible for developing standards and curricula for temple craftsmen throughout the province. Decanes was asked to establish a network of quality supervisors who could support the implementation of their methods in other communities. Their professional achievements were matched by personal contentment. Their relationship had grown stronger with each passing month, tested by the challenges of their expanding responsibilities, but never broken by them. They had learned to support each other through difficulties, to celebrate each other's successes, to find in their partnership a strength that made them both more effective in their individual roles. One morning, as they prepared for another day of teaching and administration, Judmon realized that he had stopped thinking about Kertep entirely. The pain that had once dominated his thoughts had been transformed into something else. Wisdom about the difference between passion and love, between being chosen and being valued, between starting over and starting fresh. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't been paired for the festival?" he asked Decanes as they shared breakfast on their terrace.
No, Decanes replied firmly.
"I believe we would have found each other eventually. Some connections are too strong to be left to chance." Looking at this man who had become so central to his life, Judmon felt a deep sense of gratitude not just for their love, but for the journey that had brought them together. His relationship with Kertep had been necessary, teaching him about passion and loss, about the difference between needing someone and choosing them. But his partnership with Decanes was about something deeper, the recognition of shared purpose, the joy of creative collaboration, the peace that comes from being fully known and completely accepted. The temple bells were ringing, calling them to another day of work that was also a form of worship, another opportunity to transform raw materials into something transcendent. As they walked together toward the laboratory, their hands linked, their steps perfectly synchronized, Judmon knew that he had found not just love, but his true calling. The workshop that had once been a refuge from heartbreak had become a sanctuary of hope. The amphoras that had reminded him of loss now stood as monuments to renewal. And the craft that had once been a solitary pursuit had become a shared mission that brought meaning to every day and purpose to every breath. In the end, Judmon realized, love was not about being someone's first choice or only choice. It was about being chosen consistently, valued completely, and supported unconditionally. It was about finding in another person not just a lover, but a true partner in the work of transforming the world, one small act of creation at a time. As they entered the laboratory together, ready to begin another day of teaching, creating, and loving, Judmon offered a silent prayer of gratitude to Isis for the gift of second chances, for the wisdom to recognize true love when it appeared, and for the courage to choose hope over fear, partnership over solitude, and the future over the past. The years that followed brought changes that neither Judmon nor Decanes could have anticipated when they first began their partnership. Their methods spread throughout the province and beyond, transforming the way sacred beverages were created in temples across the known world. Young craftsmen traveled great distances to study in their laboratory, eager to learn not just the technical aspects of fermentation, but the deeper principles of emotional alchemy that had made their work so renowned. Judmon found himself becoming something of a legend in the world of temple craftsmanship. Stories of his ability to transform pain into healing, to create drinks that could touch the very soul of those who consumed them, spread through the networks of priests and craftsmen that connected the various religious communities. He was invited to demonstrate his techniques at temples dedicated to other deities, adapting his methods to work with different spiritual traditions while maintaining the core principles that made his approach so effective. But success brought its own challenges. The constant travel required for teaching and consultation meant long separations from Decanes, periods when they had to rely on letters and messages to maintain their connection. The workshop that had been their private sanctuary became a busy training center, filled with apprentices and visitors who left little time for the intimate collaboration that had first brought them together. One particularly difficult period came when Judman was invited to establish a new aromatic laboratory at the Great Temple of Ammonius Ra in the capital city. The opportunity was prestigious and financially rewarding, but it would require him to spend at least 6 months away from home, possibly longer. Keynes encouraged him to accept, recognizing the importance of the work and the honor of being chosen for such a significant project. The separation was harder than either of them had expected. Despite their commitment to regular correspondence, the distance created strains that tested their relationship in ways they hadn't anticipated. Judman found himself working longer hours to distract from his loneliness, throwing himself into the establishment of the new laboratory with an intensity that worried his colleagues. Keynes, meanwhile, struggled to maintain their existing programs without his partner's creative input and emotional support. Their letters during this period revealed the depth of their connection and the pain of being apart. Judman wrote about the challenges of working in a new environment, the difficulty of training craftsmen who were set in their traditional ways, the loneliness of sleeping in a strange bed in a city that felt alien despite its grandeur. Keynes responded with news from home, updates on their apprentices' progress, accounts of innovations he was developing in Judman's absence. But beneath the practical communication was a current of longing that made every letter both a comfort and a torture. They had discovered that their partnership was more than professional convenience or even romantic love. They had become essential to each other's creative process, integral to each other's sense of purpose and identity. The breakthrough came when Keynes decided to leave his supervisory position temporarily and join Judman in the capital. The decision required significant sacrifice, as it meant abandoning work he had spent years developing and accepting a subordinate role in an unfamiliar institution. But when he arrived at the Great Temple, travel-worn and tired but smiling, Judman realized that some partnerships were too important to be constrained by conventional expectations. "I couldn't let you build something this important alone," Keynes explained as they embraced in the courtyard of the Great Temple. "We're better together than we are apart. We always have been." Working together in the new environment revealed aspects of their partnership that had been hidden when they operated within familiar surroundings. Keynes proved to be remarkably adaptable, quickly learning the protocols and traditions of the Great Temple while maintaining his analytical precision and emotional insight. Judman discovered that his teaching methods worked even better when enhanced by Keynes' ability to help students understand the theoretical principles behind the practical techniques. The Great Temple project became their masterpiece, a laboratory that combined the best aspects of traditional craftsmanship with revolutionary innovations in emotional awareness and spiritual purpose. The priests of Ammonius Ra were initially skeptical of methods that seemed to prioritize feeling over technique, but the results spoke for themselves. The beverages produced in Judman and Keynes' laboratory enhanced every aspect of temple worship, making ceremonies more powerful, meditations deeper, and healing rituals more effective. The success of the Great Temple Laboratory established them as the foremost authorities on sacred beverage creation in the civilized world. Invitations poured in from temples throughout the Mediterranean, requests for consultation from communities as far away as the Celtic lands and the kingdoms beyond the Euphrates. They could have spent the rest of their lives traveling, teaching, accumulating wealth and prestige. Instead, they chose to return home to their own temple, to the workshop where their partnership had begun, to the life they had built together in quiet dedication to their craft and their love. The decision surprised many of their colleagues, who saw it as a retreat from greater opportunities. But Judman and Keynes understood that true success was not measured in recognition or influence, but in the depth of connection they had achieved with each other and with their work. Their homecoming was celebrated throughout the temple community. The apprentices they had trained welcomed them back with a demonstration of the techniques they had mastered, creating beverages that honored their teachers while showing individual creativity and innovation. The priests expressed their gratitude for the enhanced spiritual programs that had made their temple renowned throughout the region. Even the administrative staff, who had initially been skeptical of the partnership between craftsman and supervisor, acknowledged the remarkable achievements that had resulted from their collaboration. But the most meaningful welcome came from the workshop itself. the familiar space that held so many memories of discovery, struggle, triumph, and love. The amphoras they had created together still lined the walls, now joined by vessels crafted by their students and pieces acquired during their travels. The fermentation vats hummed with the same gentle rhythms that had provided the soundtrack to their courtship, their arguments, their reconciliations, and their daily expressions of commitment to each other. "We're home," Decanes said simply as they stood together in the center of the workshop, surrounded by the tools and materials of their shared calling. "We never left," Judmon replied, understanding that home was not a place but a state of being, a condition that existed wherever they were together, working toward common goals with mutual respect and abiding love. The years that followed were perhaps their most productive and satisfying. Freed from the pressure to constantly prove themselves or expand their influence, they settled into a rhythm of work that balanced innovation with tradition, teaching with learning, professional achievement with personal fulfillment. They continued to train apprentices, but with more selectivity, choosing students who showed not just technical aptitude, but genuine understanding of the spiritual dimensions of their craft. Their relationship deepened as well, moving beyond the passion of new love and the excitement of professional success to the quieter satisfactions of true partnership. They developed rituals of daily life that honored both their individual needs and their shared commitment. Morning prayers together before beginning work, evening walks through the temple gardens, weekly visits to the markets to select ingredients and observe the changing seasons. They also began to plan for the future in ways they had never done before. Judmon started work on a comprehensive manual of fermentation techniques, a text that would preserve their innovations for future generations of craftsmen. Decanes began developing a training program for supervisors, a curriculum that would ensure quality control and emotional awareness could be maintained even after they were no longer active in the field. But their most ambitious project was the establishment of an endowment fund that would support temple craftsmen throughout the region, providing resources for experimentation, innovation, and education. They had accumulated considerable wealth through their consultations and teaching, and they wanted to ensure that financial constraints would never prevent talented individuals from pursuing excellence in sacred craftsmanship. The fund was formally established on the 5th anniversary of their partnership, with a ceremony that brought together craftsmen, supervisors, priests, and administrators from throughout the province. The celebration was both a recognition of their achievements and a commitment to the continuation of their work through the efforts of others. Elder Theron, now the senior religious authority in the province, spoke at the ceremony about the transformation that Judmon and Decanes had brought to temple craftsmanship. "They have shown us that excellence is not just about technical skill or even spiritual understanding," he said. "It is about the willingness to open oneself completely to the work, to bring all of one's experience and emotion and dedication to the service of something greater than oneself." As the formal festivities concluded and the guests departed, Judmon and Decanes found themselves alone in their workshop, surrounded by the remnants of the celebration, but returning to the quiet intimacy that had always been the foundation of their relationship. They moved through the familiar routines of cleaning and preparation, their actions synchronized by years of working together, their communication reduced to the subtle language of glances, touches, and shared understanding. "Do you remember the first time we worked together?" Decanes asked as they secured the fermentation vats for the night. "I was so nervous about impressing you, about proving that I understood what you were trying to achieve. I remember thinking you were too perceptive," Judmon replied with a smile. "I wasn't ready for someone to see so clearly what I was doing, what I was feeling. It terrified me and attracted me at the same time. And now I can't imagine doing this work without you. You've become so much a part of my process that I'm not sure where my creativity ends and yours begins." They made love that night with the tenderness of long familiarity combined with the passion that had never faded between them. Their bodies knew each other completely, every preference and sensitivity mapped through years of exploration and devotion. But beyond the physical pleasure was an emotional connection that had deepened with every shared challenge, every creative triumph, every moment of support through difficulty or celebration of success. As they lay together afterward, their breathing gradually slowing, their heartbeats returning to normal, Judmon reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. The pain of Kertep's departure, which had once seemed like the end of his capacity for love, now felt like a necessary preparation for the deeper connection he had found with Decanes. The loneliness and despair of those months alone had taught him to value partnership without dependency, to offer love without desperation, to build relationships on foundation of mutual respect rather than need. "I used to think that losing Kertep was the worst thing that could happen to me," he said quietly, his head resting on Decane's chest. "Now I understand that it was one of the best things. It taught me the difference between wanting someone and choosing them, between being chosen out of passion and being chosen out of love." "I'm grateful for your past," Decanes replied, his fingers tracing gentle patterns on Judman's back. "Every experience you had, every joy and every pain, shaped you into the person I fell in love with. I wouldn't change any of it because changing it might mean losing who you became." The conversation drifted into comfortable silence, both men content to lie together in the darkness of their chamber, listening to the distant sounds of the temple settling into nighttime quiet. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to teach and learn, new ways to express their love through the shared work that had brought them together. But tonight was perfect in its simplicity, a moment of pure connection that required nothing beyond their presence with each other. The following months brought a new development that surprised them both. One of their former apprentices, a young man named Sekit who had shown exceptional promise during his training, returned to the temple with a request that went beyond the usual appeals for advanced instruction or consultation. He had been working at a temple in the eastern provinces, applying the techniques he had learned from Judman and Decanes, when he discovered something that challenged their understanding of fermentation itself. "I was working with a batch of meditation blend," Sekit explained during his presentation to Judman and Decanes, "when I noticed that the emotional quality of the beverage seemed to change depending on the phase of the moon. At first I thought it was my imagination, but after careful observation over several cycles, I'm convinced there's a pattern." The idea was intriguing but difficult to verify. Traditional fermentation relied on temperature, timing, and ingredient quality, factors that could be controlled and measured with precision. The notion that lunar cycles might influence the emotional properties of sacred beverages introduced variables that were much harder to quantify. But Decanes was immediately interested in investigating Sekit's observations. His analytical mind was always drawn to unexplained phenomena, particularly when they intersected with the emotional aspects of their work that had become his specialty. He proposed a systematic study, carefully controlled experiments that would either confirm or disprove the lunar influence theory. The research project that followed became one of the most fascinating periods of their partnership. Working with Sekit and two other advanced apprentices, they designed experiments that tracked the development of beverages through complete lunar cycles, measuring not just the standard markers of fermentation progress but also the subtle emotional qualities that Decanes had learned to detect and categorize. The work required unprecedented precision and patience. Each batch had to be prepared identically, with ingredients measured to the exact gram, temperatures maintained within fractions of a degree, timing recorded to the minute. But beyond the technical challenges was the need to maintain emotional consistency, to ensure that the craftsman's own state of mind didn't influence the results they were trying to measure. The project brought out the best in both Judman and Decanes, combining Judman's intuitive understanding of fermentation with Decane's systematic approach to investigation. They worked with the focused intensity of scholars pursuing a fundamental truth, but also with the joy of partners sharing a fascinating discovery. After 6 months of careful experimentation, the results were undeniable. Beverages prepared during the waxing moon developed qualities of hope and anticipation. Those started during the full moon carried intensity and power. Waning moon beverages promoted introspection and release, while new moon batches encouraged new beginnings and fresh perspectives. The discovery revolutionized their understanding of sacred beverage creation, adding a new dimension to the craft that connected it even more deeply to the natural rhythms that governed all life. More importantly, it validated their approach of treating fermentation as a spiritual as well as physical process, proof that their methods were uncovering genuine principles rather than merely applying personal preferences. The lunar fermentation research made them famous beyond the world of temple craftsmanship. Scholars from the great libraries of Alexandria and Athens sought them out, eager to understand how practical artisans had made a discovery that had eluded years of theoretical investigation. Natural philosophers proposed visits to observe their methods, while astronomers suggested collaborations that would explore the broader implications of lunar influence on organic processes. But fame brought complications as well as opportunities. The constant stream of visitors disrupted the peaceful rhythms of their workshop, making it difficult to maintain the intimate collaboration that had always been the source of their best work. Requests for demonstrations and lectures consumed time they would have preferred to spend on training apprentices or developing new techniques. The solution came from an unexpected source. High Priest Marcus, now elderly but still sharp in his judgment, proposed the establishment of a separate research institute that would handle the scholarly inquiries while allowing Judmon and Decanes to continue their primary work in relative peace. The institute would be funded through the endowment they had established, staffed with carefully selected scholars and craftsmen, and directed by Sekhet, whose original observations had started the whole investigation. The arrangement proved ideal for everyone involved. The Research Institute provided a proper venue for scientific investigation and scholarly collaboration, satisfying the demands for access while protecting the working laboratory from excessive disruption. Judmon and Decanes could participate in the research that interested them while maintaining their focus on training and innovation. And Sekhet gained the opportunity to lead an important institution while continuing to develop his own understanding of fermentation principles. With the Research Institute handling external demands, Judmon and Decanes returned to the work they loved most, teaching individual apprentices in the intimate setting of their workshop. They refined their selection process even further, accepting only students who showed not just technical aptitude, but genuine emotional maturity and spiritual understanding. The result was a series of masterful craftsmen who carried their methods to temples throughout the known world, spreading their innovations while adapting them to local conditions and traditions. One of their most successful students was a young Egyptian named Amenhotep, who combined exceptional technical skills with an almost supernatural ability to sense the spiritual needs of those who would consume his beverages. Under their guidance, he developed techniques for creating drinks that could address specific emotional states, offering comfort to the grieving, courage to the fearful, clarity to the confused. Another remarkable apprentice was Marcus, a Gaul whose people had their own ancient traditions of fermentation, but who was eager to learn the more sophisticated methods of temple craftsmanship. He eventually returned to his homeland, where he established the first formal training program for sacred beverage creation among the Celtic peoples, bridging two very different approaches to the spiritual use of fermented drinks. Perhaps their most challenging student was Lucius, a Roman whose intellectual pride initially made him resistant to the emotional aspects of their teaching. He wanted to understand the technical principles without engaging with the spiritual dimensions, treating fermentation as a purely mechanical process that could be mastered through logic and repetition. But Judmon and Decanes persisted with him, gradually helping him recognize that true mastery required the integration of mind, heart, and spirit that characterized all great craftsmanship. The breakthrough with Lucius came during a particularly difficult period when his personal life was disrupted by family troubles. His carefully controlled approach to fermentation began producing beverages with subtle notes of anxiety and distress, flavors so delicate that only Decanes could detect them but significant enough to affect the spiritual impact of the drinks. Rather than criticizing these unwanted qualities, Judmon helped Lucius understand how his emotional state was influencing his work and taught him techniques for transforming personal turmoil into spiritual insight. The lesson was a revelation for Lucius, who had spent years trying to separate his feelings from his work. Under Judmon's guidance, he learned to acknowledge his emotions without being controlled by them, to channel his experiences into his craft without compromising its quality. The beverages he created during this period of learning carried a depth and complexity that marked him as a true master, someone who had learned to transform personal struggle into universal healing. As the years passed, Judmon and Decanes watched their students spread throughout the world, carrying their methods to places they had never imagined reaching. Reports came back of successful programs established in temples dedicated to dozens of different deities, adaptations of their techniques that worked with local ingredients and traditions, innovations that built upon their principles while developing in directions they had never explored. The network of craftsmen they had trained became a source of continuing education for both teachers and students. Regular gatherings allowed for the sharing of discoveries, the discussion of challenges, the development of new approaches that incorporated lessons learned in diverse environments. Judmon and Decanes found themselves learning as much from their former students as they had ever taught. Their own understanding deepened by exposure to the variations and innovations that others had developed. One particularly memorable gathering brought together representatives from temples across 3 continents, creating an unprecedented exchange of knowledge and techniques. For a week, the temple grounds hummed with the sounds of fermentation, the sense of exotic ingredients, the conversations of craftsmen who shared a common dedication to excellence despite their very different backgrounds and traditions. Judmon and Decanes served as hosts for the gathering, but they also participated as students, eager to learn from the experiences of others. They discovered new ingredients that enhanced familiar recipes, innovative timing techniques that improved fermentation consistency, spiritual practices that deepen the connection between craftsman and craft. The event culminated in a collaborative ceremony where representatives from each tradition contributed ingredients and techniques to create a single, magnificent beverage that embodied the best aspects of all their approaches. The resulting drink was extraordinary, carrying flavors and spiritual qualities that none of them could have achieved alone, a perfect demonstration of the power of cooperation and shared knowledge. As the gathering concluded and the visitors departed, Judmon and Decanes stood together in their workshop, surrounded by new ingredients and filled with new ideas, but also deeply grateful for the opportunity to return to the quiet intimacy of their daily work. The week had been exhilarating and educational, but it had also reminded them of the value of the simple, consistent practice that formed the foundation of their partnership. "I love these gatherings," Decanes said as they began organizing the gifts and samples they had received from their visitors. "But I love this even more. This quiet moment when it's just us again, when we can focus on the work without having to explain or demonstrate or perform. This is when the real magic happens." Judmon nodded, understanding exactly what Decanes meant. The public recognition and scholarly investigation were gratifying, but the heart of their work remained the daily practice of fermentation, the careful attention to ingredients and timing and spiritual intention that transformed simple materials into something transcendent. They had achieved everything they had ever dreamed of and more. Their methods had spread throughout the known world. Their students had become masters in their own right. Their discoveries had advanced human understanding of the connections between craft and spirituality. But the deepest satisfaction came not from external recognition but from the quiet moments of creation, the daily renewal of their commitment to excellence, the continuing evolution of their partnership through shared work and mutual love. As they settled into their evening routine, checking the fermentation vats, adjusting temperatures, preparing for the next day's work, Judmon felt a profound sense of completion. Not the completion of ending, but the completion of fulfillment, the recognition that he had found his purpose and was living it fully every day. The workshop was quiet except for the gentle bubbling of fermentation, the soft sounds that had provided the soundtrack to their love story from its very beginning. The amphras that lined the walls held not just beverages in various stages of development, but memories of every stage of their relationship, every challenge they had overcome, every triumph they had shared. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to teach and learn, new ways to express their love through the work that had brought them together. But tonight was perfect in its simplicity, a moment of pure connection between 2 people who had found in each other the perfect complement to their individual gifts and ambitions. In the end, Judmon realized the greatest fermentation had been not of any beverage they had created, but of their love itself. Like the finest drinks that improved with age and careful tending, their relationship had developed complexity and depth through time, challenge, and devoted attention. What had begun as attraction and compatibility had transformed into something rare and precious. A partnership that enhanced every aspect of their lives while creating something greater than either could have achieved alone.